We believed that we could build a new world without borders, wars, and violence.
Peace, progress, prosperity. But what lies behind these bright slogans?
Resistance. Confederation. Your war will never end.
In the year 2038, thousands of armed militias, criminal gangs, revolutionaries, rebel cells, insurrectionists, and freedom fighters, all inspired by the actions of a single man, united under a singular banner that was to be known to history as the Resistance. 20 years after the Global Confederation came to power in 2018, after the decades-long strong struggle between the Great Asian Alliance and the North Atlantic Confederation, the future looked bright for humanity as diseases were eradicated, bright, charming cities were built for their inhabitants, and the environment that was scarred by years of war began to blossom once more. However, despite all the altruistic acts done by the Confederation Senate, it didn't always have all of its member nations in mind, and with the rapidly growing economic inequality between the rich and poor, resentment against the Senate spread like wildfire, and it was further aggravated by the ruthless approach taken by the Confederation Peacekeeping Corps in quashing dissent. The hatred reached its breaking point by the year 2038, when hundreds of rebel cells began to sprout across the globe, forcing the Senate to allocate resources to suppress these riots. In the middle of 2038, rebel activity was detected in the capital of Peru, Pucallpa. Due to the region being the most peaceful continent in the world, most weapons from the world disarmament were brought there, a mistake exploited by the insurrectionists. However, due to the tactical brilliance of General Vladimir Gromov and his deputy, Lieutenant Natalie Janet, the first Peruvian uprising was successfully suppressed, and their leader, General Miguel Monteros, was captured. However, this victory was short-lived. 3 months later, his brother, General Jose Monteros, would regroup their forces under the Peruvian Liberation Army and strike decisively, completely annihilating the garrisoned Confederation forces there. And with their victory, uprisings sparked across the globe under the flag of the Resistance, all united in their desire to overthrow the Senate's regime. Despite having hundreds of cells spread across the world, the Resistance operates on a highly centralized command structure. The organization at the top of this structure is Central Command, which is directly responsible for all the diplomatic, economic, military, scientific, and strategic aspects of the Resistance. Below it is a network of lesser commands who dictate tactical action and less important duties. The armed forces of the Resistance are split into the Resistance Army, which covers everything from small commando squads to large strike forces. Then the Resistance Air Force, which is responsible for all aerial assets of the Resistance. And finally, the Navy, which is in charge of marine security and operations. The Resistance is significantly lagging behind in terms of technological advancement, and so most of its equipment, vehicles, and gear are created in one of 3 ways. Either they are old and unused scrap, or they are designs formulated via discarded blueprints or retired vehicles of the Confederation that have been retrofitted for modern warfare. All of this puts the Resistance at a disadvantage when compared to the technological superiority of the Confederation, forcing its commanders to rely on the speed of their units, focusing on swift strikes on valid military targets, and forcing fights on favorable conditions rather than direct engagements.
These unorthodox tactics were how the resistance was able to win key victories, such as the fall of Fort Avis and the destruction of the space system prototype. However, they also left the resistance vulnerable to simply being crushed under the weight of the Confederation's superior firepower whenever a direct engagement actually happened. The majority of the resistance army is made up of volunteer militias who are subjected to living conditions so cramped and abhorrent that senior technician Harmir Dammit described them as not the best. Despite this, the resistance continues to recruit them by the thousands, mainly from areas that have suffered the most from the Senate's rule, such as South America and Africa. Volunteers are often given excellent training by trainers who defected from the Confederation Army, given resistance personnel an intimate knowledge of Confederation systems and weak points. The Resistance Air Force, though vastly inferior to the Confederation's, is one of the Resistance's strengths and is used primarily for transportation of ground troops and close air support duties. The Air Force's doctrine focuses on heavier armor and firepower, allowing them to hold their own in direct engagements with Confederation aircraft, despite being multiple generations in technology behind them. The Resistance Navy was originally constructed out of old Confederation Coast Guard patrol vessels re-edified for military use. But due to encountering the Confederation heavy fleet more often, it was eventually upgraded to include heavy corvettes, submarines, transports, carriers, and more. The primary focuses of the Resistance Navy are shore bombardment, coastal defense, and convoy raiding, although the widespread deployment of the Confederation's heavy fleet has decreased the effectiveness of such tactics. Unlike the global Confederation, the Resistance does not have a set recruitment process for commissioned officers, preferring instead to pick from its most experienced members, subjecting them to training camps, and finally testing them via, quote, baptisms by fire. This not only ensures maximum performance from its field commanders, but also establishes a level of loyalty to the cause. The Resistance operates a secret web of sympathizers embedded within the global Confederation itself that includes everyone from security service operatives to ministerial secretaries that are constantly feeding Central Command classified information. Thanks to them, nothing the Senate does will be considered a surprise, although the Confederation Security Service makes its best efforts to root out members of this web. Due to the inequality of military power, the Resistance is ready to resort to large-scale terror in the name of global liberation, such as the Libyan nuclear crisis, where the Resistance planned to strike Western European cities with nuclear warheads via their submarines, or when they executed fleeing Confederation scientists trying to leave a Confederation base off the Gulf of Mexico, with the effectiveness of such actions being known only to Central Command, although any tactical benefit gotten by these actions or what cause they were meant to further does not excuse their odious nature. In the initial days of the Peruvian conflict, the Peruvian Liberation Army relied heavily on weapons from wars long past and depended on the local population for food, water, and medical aid. But as the resistance expanded, it developed supply lines just under the nose of the Confederation to make sure its guerrillas were properly equipped. However, as valuable resources became more scarce, the organization was forced to employ various tactics in order to remain stocked. Some of these include securing resource-intensive sectors, the repeated habit of looting Confederation warehouses and stores, and finally, the shaky alliance between the resistance and the shadowy organization known as the Syndicate. The partnership was first established when the syndicate sponsored pocket resistance cells during the initial global uprisings, and ever since then, the resistance has established an increasingly dependent relationship with it as it relies more and more on its arms, intel, and technology. However, how this relationship will continue to develop remains to be seen. After the uniting under one banner, the resistance grows from a local rebellion in Peru to a global insurrection capable of even challenging the Confederation in equal numbers, although Western Europe remains completely under Confederation control. Africa, Asia, and the Americas are contested territory with the Confederation. Despite all this, the people of the world can rest hopeful that the resistance will stay persistent and unrelenting in liberating the nations of the world from the tyrannical and unjust regime of the globalists.